Live from Salem, Virginia, this is the Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show from D3Football.com. I'm Frank Rossi, being joined, as always, on this show by Ryan Tipps and Adam Turer, and we're going to go through the next hour or so with some live shots here of Salem, of the outside. We'll explain in a second why we're not outside, and it's going to become part of the game in some ways. We'll talk about that in a moment, but we'll have the All-America team coming up at around 6 o'clock, so wait for that announcement coming up. And we'll have some interviews on a separate stream, and we'll talk more about that as well later, but a separate stream starting around 6:25 later on. We'll explain how to get to that stream and those interviews and the main audio stream for the game itself. But, guys, it's Stagg Bowl 43, and, hey, this is a rematch, but not the same rematch we often talk about. This is St. Thomas back in the fold against Mount Union. And kudos, first off, to Glenn Caruso and his St. Thomas team after kind of falling off after 2012 for a couple of seasons. They've gotten back in this in a big way. And, Ryan, we'll start with you. How impressed are you with the St. Thomas team, the way they have come back and the path they had to kind of fight through to get to this game?
Well, I love the, Coach Caruso has always been a great recruiter. You almost had no doubt that he was going to rebuild this team. He's built it into a team that is tough in the trenches, has some speed, and can really kind of has some finesse ability on the field as well. So he's really kind of recruited the best of both worlds. I know he's been looking to get bigger and bigger over the years in terms of the players he's bringing back, and it was really only a matter of time before we would expect to see him where we're seeing him today here in Salem.
Well, some people look at them as kind of the underdog coming into this game, but Mount Union, in some ways, feels maybe that they played their Stagg Bowl last week because they had to face a team that they've always faced in the Stagg Bowl, it seems like, except for once in the last 10 years, and that was, of course, Wisconsin Whitewater. They beat them in Alliance last week. You were there, Adam, as was Ryan. What was your takeaway from that game, and what do you think their mentality is heading into this one?
Well, I can assure you that Vince Karras and his crew and his players and coaches do not feel that last week was the culmination. They know that Week 15 is what they've come to expect at Mount Union. Week 15 is what matters, what makes or breaks their season. And as Vince said following the game last Saturday, if they don't take care of business tonight, that win over Whitewater is diminished severely. So he'll have them focused, he'll have them ready to go, and they know that this is their night, this is their moment.
So let's talk about one of the features that may influence the game, and it's why we're inside. Honestly, we've done cold weather before. That's never been a problem in my 9 seasons, basically doing pregame shows with the team here. But the wind. This is the windiest in the pregame we've ever had, and I'm sure it's going to last through the game according to the weather reports. We have a pretty good 15 to 20 mile per hour wind going from left to right on what will be your audio dial coming up in a little while. And that's going to be a real problem possibly for the passing and definitely the kicking games. Who do you think it may factor the most, though, out of these two teams? And I'll start with Ryan on that one. Or maybe not.
No, I mean that's hard to say because both teams have a great running game, and especially in the postseason here with Mount Union, they've really established Logan Nemeth as a standout running back who can handle a really workhorse load, and it's hard to say of which one it would affect more because both of them have so many weapons on offense and are so diverse on offense that they have some ground backup plans that will certainly work out well for him today.
Agree on that?
When it comes to the kicking game, I think both these teams are very suited to avoid wind being a factor in the kicking game. We know St. Thomas loves to go for it. They love to go for 2. They love to go for it on 4th down more than any other team in the country. So it's not going to be much of a factor as far as special teams, I don't think. And again, these teams, are both very well equipped for this kind of weather this late in the season.
Now, in 2012, when these two teams faced in the Stagg Bowl, there was some definite aggression toward the end of the game that we have talked about a little bit in the past about attempt to kneel out the game by Mount Union. St. Thomas wasn't ready necessarily to just go with that. Pat Coleman interviewed Coach Caruso about that. You'll hear that in the next hour, how he responded to it. But do you think there's a little bit of bad blood between these teams based on that one matchup? What are you thinking?
I think there has. I mean, bad blood for Division III. Yeah, there probably is. I would say so.
Memories die hard in these games, I would think.
I'm going to disagree, just because I've talked to Coach Caruso so many times over the years, and he's explained why he did that, just because he called a timeout. That was the first time this program had been on this stage. He wanted the players, especially the seniors, to really take care of every moment. You can't take the timeouts home with you. Why not take the timeouts? And it wasn't like he was doing it just to aggravate Mount Union. He took those timeouts, brought his team together in a speech, let them know what he meant to them, let them know what it meant to get the program to this stage. And I think it's something that the players who are back now, we have 12 players from that roster in 2012 who played in that game who are back tonight. I think they're going to take that with them, and they certainly remember it more than anyone from the Mount Union side would.
Well, again, Pat Coleman did speak with Coach Caruso. You'll hear those interviews starting at around 6:25 after the All-America team announcement. Again, it will be on a separate stream. So if you got to this stream some other way than from d3football.com, make sure you go to d3football.com to find the secondary stream, which will become the primary stream later on, in terms of the audio broadcast and the post-game and everything else you'll want to hear from us here on d3football.com. But we'll have the All-America show on the stream starting at 6 o'clock Eastern Time live. And also coming up in this hour, we're going to have Lenny Reich, the head of communications, the sports information director per se, and a whole lot more over at Mount Union, joining us to talk about Mount Union's road to the Stagg Bowl. And we'll have Fritz Waldvogel, who was a former Ghilardi finalist and also a standout wide receiver and kick returner for St. Thomas. He's now a sideline commentator for St. Thomas's radio station. He'll join us. We'll kind of compare notes on how we're going to stay warm tonight in the 40-degree kickoff temperature or thereabouts. So a lot coming up here on the Stagg Bowl pregame show. Again, I'm Frank Rossi, Ryan Tipps, Adam Turr to my left, and we'll be here till the bottom of the hour, or the top of the hour, coming up at 6 o'clock when we will throw it to the All-America show. Guys, along the way, kind of to tempt people a little bit about some of the stuff we'll talk about, there were a lot of games you went out to see yourself, Ryan. You do the Around the Nation segment of the d3football.com, the write-up every week for. What was your takeaway from this season compared to many others that you've seen? Was it a tougher road for a lot of teams? Was there a lot of youth out there that you saw? What's your main takeaway in terms of just the differences in 2015 compared to maybe the last couple of years that you've been out there?
Well, I've thought about this a lot, actually, and one of the things that's really, I guess, surprised me is the surprises. This year we saw several of the sort of long streaks, whether it's Salisbury taking down Wesley, Hardin-Simmons taking down Mary Hardin-Baylor, even Whitewater losing a regular season game, and other teams, Hobart not winning the Liberty League, and Delaware Valley or Widener not being at the top of the MAC. I mean, this was a season that shook up sort of the institutional knowledge of what we assumed about these teams, and it made it, from a fan perspective, no disrespect to the teams that lost, of course. From a fan and a journalist perspective, it made it for a really exciting, edgier seat sort of season every single week.
It's kind of interesting, though. We end up back to a rematch, despite the fact we were guaranteed not to have the Stagg Bowl rematch in the last couple of years, obviously. We still end up with the rematch.
Yeah, and Ryan makes a great point about the parity that we saw. And parity in D3 is all relative. Obviously, Mount Union's here for the 11th straight year. But, we did see parity, and we saw different conference winners. We saw the conference realignment having immediate effects, especially in conferences like the NJAC. And, I think St. Thomas and Glenn Caruso really set a blueprint. He took over a program that was coming off a 2-8 season and brought them here to Salem just a few short years later. And now you're seeing a lot of programs have new coaches who aren't waiting around and aren't content to be the bottom feeders in their league. They're recruiting, rebuilding, and making great progress, and I think the playing field is leveling out to a certain point. We're seeing, we talk every year about where is the threshold in Division III? Is it the top 4 teams? Is it the top 6 teams? Which team's going to break through? And while we still have the top 4 or 5 regular contenders to get to Salem, I think the next wave below that seems to be really cycling up, and more teams really have a belief that they can get there.
Well, nonetheless, whether they believe it or not, we still have the same 2 out of 3 teams that have been in the Stagg Bowl in the last decade, and we've got a great matchup coming up. We'll talk more about that matchup with Lenny Reich coming up after our break, and then Fritz Waldvogel after that. So you'll want to stay tuned here. Again, it's the d3football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. We'll be back.
I used to never really talk. Ever. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. It helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
Division III schools offer academic scholarships instead of athletic scholarships. This really puts the focus that the student athlete needs to maintain that GPA.
I did receive a non-athletic scholarship upon entering school.
I got the presidential scholarship, which was huge for me.
I think there's more opportunities for academic scholarships in Division III. A lot of people pick schools just based on the sport and don't get that experience.
Being a Division III athlete and developing my leadership skills has definitely put my name out there and helped me get more recognition on campus, but more recognition nationwide. I did win the Jostens Trophy, which is based on leadership, academics, and then how well you do on the court.
I'm also the Schwartz Scholar of my class. Schwartz Scholarship is basically a scholarship that is given to a student who's identified as a likely leader.
And the end of the day, it won't matter how they play on the field, it will matter how they do in the classroom.
I'm a Division III student athlete, and I know how powerful words can be. The term gay doesn't mean stupid, lame, or less than.
So I pledge to speak up if I hear the term gay used in a derogatory way or any other homophobic terms.
If you can play in Division III.
I'm a Division III student athlete, and my teammates unconditionally accepted me as part of their family. So now I pledge to do the same for others. If you can play in Division III.
Bowl pregame show, Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show on d3football.com. I'm Frank Rossi, Adam Turr with me right now. Lenny Reich, he's one of the busiest men in Division III athletics, and right now he's proving it. He's right now giving pronunciations and the such for St. Thomas and coming in here any moment now, so we will have him join us in a moment. Let's again, you were at the game last week, Adam. Some more takeaways from that game. It seemed like Wisconsin-Whitewater had a kind of a hot start in that game, and you almost kind of felt like, oh, here we go again in terms of Mount Union kind of slipping away a little bit early in that game. Yet their resilience in that game is what impressed me a lot. What about you?
Well, what I looked for in that matchup was the offensive line and defensive line matchup, because the last 2 years here on this field, that was the difference. The difference was Whitewater won the battles up front, and Mount Union knew that. They heard about it for the last 3 years. They were tired of hearing about it. And really, from the beginning of that game last week, Mount Union was winning those battles. But the difference was Whitewater had some key third down conversions in the first two drives, but then Mount Union's defense settled down, held them to field goals, proved to be huge later on in the game. They gave up 6 points in the first two drives, and that was it for the rest of the game. And once Mount Union's offense started humming, there was no slowing them down. Even though they were only held to 36 points, they really were not tested in the last 3 quarters of that game.
It's the war in the trenches that you're talking about that actually led me here. I think St. Thomas has a pretty good defensive line component. We'll see some names. Actually, I should not kind of give it away. All-America team's coming up at 6 o'clock, so I can't say yet who's where, but you're going to see a definite trend on maybe lines and one side of the ball versus the other on the teams that we're talking about here. But it's that in-the-trenches scenario where, as you said, Mount Union lost it the last couple of years, it felt like, and really had their quarterback, Kevin Burke, on the run, not comfortable in his read option offense. And it should be interesting to see if St. Thomas can continue that. That's why I gave them the edge, and it didn't go unnoticed, apparently, that I gave St. Thomas the edge in our prediction segment on d3football.com. In that article that we wrote, people did pick it out. Lenny's probably still mad at me, actually, for that. That might be why he's not here yet, but he's coming up.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, St. Thomas does not have the top rushing game in this matchup. Mount Union does. And Mount Union, we've always seen them as more of a balanced offense, but, they've rushed for 317 yards a game, 8 games over 300 yards rushing this season. But then St. Thomas kind of has a balanced attack where they'll take what the defense gives, and if they want John Gould to throw for 300 yards, they'll protect him and let him throw for 300 yards.
Now, I got to do this because I'm just looking at this, but I see notes, and on the notes, well scribbled like a good attorney, It says, run the dang ball. Now, why don't you tell folks why that's on your sheet right now?
Well, first of all, these two teams, this matchup, I love this matchup. This, just from a football fan standpoint, from what I believe in as a former player and a football fan and a football reporter, this matchup is the two teams that are the two best teams in the country that have everything that I think makes good football. And I was telling someone earlier, it's the things that my son and I, who's a huge college football fan, will yell at the TV watching the game, is run the dang ball and never punt. And could you have two more perfect teams that are going to run the dang ball and never punt?
Well, I think Glenn Caruso might punt less than Vince Karras in this game. Another storyline we got to think about here, and this is one that kind of gets lost. The winner of this game will be a first-time Stagg Bowl champion head coach since Larry Karras had retired right after beating St. Thomas 3 years ago. And so Whitewater wins the last 2 years, and lo and behold, we're here in the situation where it's Vince Karras versus Glenn Caruso. Do you think that's in their minds at all?
You know, I think it probably helps balance things out that they're both in the same position. You know, they've both coached in this game previously. They've both lost this game previously, and they're both motivated to reverse that.
We're going to actually bring in our second guest first, out of deference to what Lenny has to do in his role right now. And our second guest first is going to be St. Thomas's Fritz Wallvogel, who will be kind of joining me down on the sidelines tonight. And Fritz, I sure hope that I think somewhere in my pocket here I have some hot packs. I may have another set somewhere. Did you bring some to stay warm tonight?
Yeah, you got to bring it. I got the full attire. I got the compressions on underneath this, so I'm ready to roll. I mean, we're from Minnesota, so we're used to the cold.
Now, a few years ago, obviously, you saw this matchup between St. Thomas and Mount Union. Is it different this go-around, do you think, from your perspective?
I think so. I mean, this is the second time being here, obviously, and you're just used to the game day environment. Some of these players were here. I think there's 4 or 5 players that played on that team, 3 years ago. And the coaching staff, I think they adjusted things on how they prepared. Even the fan buses, for example, the planes. I mean, 3 years ago we struggled to get 2 planes filled, and now we got two full flights coming out. It's just an adjustment period, and I think it'll be hopefully reflect a better outcome today.
One thing to take off of what you're mentioning, the Spotlight on Champions dinner last night had one of its largest attendances ever, with about 700 plus people, and a lot of it was 2 busfuls of St. Thomas fans came by. So there is definitely a lot of purple beyond the Pantone equivalent of your purple, let's say, versus Mount Union. So that will be out in the stands tonight cheering on the team. For those that don't know, Fritz was a wide receiver and kick returner for St. Thomas, a Glardy Trophy finalist not that long ago. What year was that?
2011.
It was 2011, so the year before St. Thomas had made it to the Stagg Bowl. So yeah, you had a pretty good affiliation with Salem. Now you've come back. You're a sideline guy. What made you want to make that transition?
I got done playing in Europe after the 2012 season and ran into Dave Lee at one of the playoff games, and who's our color guy or play-by-play guy on WCCO radio. And I ended up just doing a little broadcast in one of the playoff games, and it kind of turned into next year. It's like, hey, why don't we just do this full time and on the side, and it's been a lot of fun. It's a fun program to be along. I got a younger brother that's still playing, so it's great to still be involved.
Yeah, and what do you share with Nick that from your experience, and what do you see is different about his preparation the last couple seasons?
I just try to pass on along as best as I can some information, but whether he takes it or not is up to him. But no, he's a great kid. He's done a great job, finding his own way at St. Thomas. He's had a really nice year. With Jordan Roberts coming in this year for the running back situation, he played running back the last couple of years, and so when Jordan Roberts comes in Division I running back, they moved him receiver, and I think he's adjusted pretty well to it and had a pretty nice season.
So, a lot of people would say St. Thomas is the underdog coming into this game. Is that team downstairs tonight feeding off that against Mount Union, do you think?
I would think so. I mean, you look at it. I would say you're the underdog. You've never beat Mount Union. You've never won a national title. So from their perspective, they got a great group down there that really is all about a team atmosphere. That they're just going to try to go out and do their role. Whether it's maybe it's not the sexy play or whatever, where you're not actually making the tackle, but you're helping somebody else make a tackle, and they do a great job of just playing team defense and team offense.
What would you say are the keys to the game? If St. Thomas is going to win this game, what are the 3 things they have to do?
Well, I think they're going to have to run the ball really well. They're going to have to get Jordan Roberts established early, offensively. Defensively, they're going to have to stop the run, force Mount Union into some passing situations. But, the thing I worry about is St. Thomas ends up playing man a lot, man coverage. advantage, and because they bring the house a lot on the defense, is limiting the big plays and making Mount Union drive 70, 80 yards to get a touchdown instead of the big 70, 80-yard run. And then thirdly, I would say special teams is huge. St. Thomas, as much of the national notoriety their special teams has gotten this year, is really dominating that side of the ball, because I think field position is going to end up being a huge part of this game.
The wind is part of that as well. Mm-hmm. Does it affect St. Thomas much, do you think, tonight?
I don't think. I mean, if anything, I think it helps them out. I mean, they're a power run team, play action pass type offense. So, the wind, I don't think is a huge issue for them. And I think, as you saw last week, they'd rather give Jordan Roberts the ball, 40 times a game and get a win that way.
Now, as a former punt returner, how does the wind like this affect your role?
It's frightening, to be honest. But it makes it a lot tougher. Especially it's kind of a bowl setting behind us, and the wind a lot of times can swirl up top. So even though you're sitting in the field, it may be going one way or the other, but sometimes it's hard to know what it is up, 30, 40 yards in the air.
How important is communication with your teammates when that's going on? Because they don't see it.
Huge, yeah. If you're trying to communicate, as best you can, and know where the ball's going, and a lot of times, you may see more fair catches maybe today, just to make sure you're fielding the ball correctly, and you don't have to worry about maybe communicating to your teammates.
Or with these teams, we might not see any punts at all.
That's right. You haven't seen many. Both teams haven't punted much this year.
Fritz, want to give you a chance to say hello to anybody that might be watching at this point back home?
Yeah, thanks. Happy to have everyone back in Minnesota watching the D3.com pregame show. They do such a great job, covering Division III. I don't think they get enough credit. So thanks to Pat and Keith and the gang to continue to push Division III football.
How much did Pat and Keith pay you for that endorsement before?
Not enough.
Fritz Wallvogel, I will see you on the sideline, my friend, and we'll share war stories after this one is done, I'm sure, about how we did stay warm for Stagg Bowl 43. But if St. Thomas wins, I bet you'll be a little bit warmer than I am.
Yeah, I think so. Let's hope they can pull it out.
Their fans are, I don't want to say rabid because it comes off the wrong way, but they are a very vociferous, hungry, it's a good word, fan base out there, and we appreciate that in Division III through and through. So
thanks.
Good luck to your team tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thanks guys.
A lot,
We're going to try to get Lenny in here, Lenny Reich, that is, in a little bit here. So first we'll take a break. You're watching the Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show on D3Football.com.
What makes D3 special is the ability to participate in my team and within the broader community.
The perfect ending to a perfect season.
Being a D3 student athlete has completely expanded my life.
I learned how to lead. I really found a voice.
What time is it?
It's more about the experience rather than just a sport itself.
Without the experience of being a Division III student athlete, I wouldn't be the person who I am today.
NCAA Division III. Discover, develop, dedicate.
I used to never really talk. Ever. I was scared and shy. It was hard to look at people's faces. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. I made friends and won lots of gold medals. But I learned more than just playing golf. Special Olympics helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
I'm a Division III student athlete, and I know how powerful words can be. The term gay doesn't mean stupid, lame, or less than.
So I pledge to speak up if I hear the term gay used in a derogatory way or any other homophobic terms.
If you can play in Division III. I'm a Division III student athlete, and my teammates unconditionally accepted me as part of their family. So now I pledge to do the same for others. If you can play in Division III.
Again, welcome back here to the D3Football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. I'm Frank Rossi, Adam Turifar to the right side of your screen, and this is not Lenny Reich. This is Carrie Harvey Cutter, and Carrie is the Director of Tourism and Game Manager here in Salem, Virginia, Game Manager for tonight's game especially, and did a lot of great work along with John Saunders and company. We'll talk about him in a moment. But first off, Carrie, welcome, and how you feeling tonight about the game itself and the fan bases that are here that you saw the last couple of days?
I'm really happy. Mountain Union always brings a good fan group. We sold about 1,100 tickets on campus, plus we sold a number of tickets here through credit cards and Ticketmaster.com and all those kind of areas. St. Thomas chartered 2 flights down, so we're very happy with them. Puts a lot of people in hotels or eating in our restaurants. It's good for the local economy, and my job's done because the teams are in the gate, and that's all I had to worry about.
Did I mention he was the Director of Tourism for Salem, Virginia? So
that's what it's about.
Carrie, you used to be the Director of Civic Facilities. John Saunders is more in that role right now. What kind of job has John done since you've kind of taken a step back? Yeah, a real big step back, you can tell. But a step back nonetheless in terms of what his job has become.
It's really been interesting because John and I worked together 30-some years. I hired him as the Assistant Director in '83, and until I retired 2 years ago, he was my assistant. He's doing a great job. They've had probably the best fall at the Civic Center they've had in 10 years with good concert business, good trade show business, so it's been very good. He's working very hard. He's got a great assistant in Paul Bowles, who was the number 3 when I was here. They're just pushing it. They're making a lot of contacts.
Adam, you've been here how many years now?
My first Stagg Bowl was in 2005 when I was a student athlete. I went to school here in the beautiful Blue Ridge and at Washington and Lee, so I've been coming here for this is my 10th Stagg Bowl.
What are your thoughts as the years have gone along about the changes and the improvements that have been made, especially under Carrie's regime?
Well, I think it's great because the location is great. I think it's great to have a D3 specific host venue that's specific to, it caters to the Division III community, and we know that every year Division III football has a home here in Salem, Virginia. People look forward to it all year. After making the trip so many times from the various cities we come from, we have our favorite places that we stop along the way. The local economy seems to be growing every year. I noticed last year there's a local brewery in town now.
There is, just up the street.
There is. So maybe people planning for next year can hit up Soaring Ridge. But it just continues to grow, and I think seeing the fan bases come back year after year. I know we see Mount Union almost every year, but seeing the new people come, and I know players and coaches from teams that don't make it this far still want to come and get the experience. And I think that when they come here and see it, they'll be taken aback by how impressive it is.
We're a Division III town.
Yes,
We've worked the Division III market. Our student athletes and our high school pattern student athletes in Division III football and basketball and softball that we host. And so it's a lot of commonality between us. But I have to get the plug in. There's a brewery closer than Soaring Ridge Parkway just up the street here. I am tourism, guys. And
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and if you heard that, make sure you send some product our way later on. Anyway, the future of this championship in Salem, why don't you tell folks what that future is and when the next deadline is, per se.
We start bidding again next year. Lovely time. We have 2 more years, so it's a 4-year agreement. We have 2 more years on this agreement, 2 more years on men's basketball. 3 on basketball because of the season we're in, and then 3 on softball. 1 more in Division III, 2 on Division II softball.
I'm going to give you the last word. 60 seconds. Talk to the folks out there and give them your best spiel on why they should come to Roanoke and Salem, even when there's not a championship being played.
There's so much to do in the Valley. It's a great place for outdoor tourism. We're a world-class outdoor biking system. We're 15 minutes from the Appalachian Trail, 20 minutes from the Blue Ridge Parkway, Smith Mountain Lake with great bass fishing, Washington and Lee, as we heard earlier, and VMI just up the road in Lexington, Virginia. Just south of us is Virginia Tech, great campus, good historical area all around through us. Just a lot of things to do outside. In the winter, we've just opened a new trampoline park, so you can go down and jump in the trampoline and basketball.
Can we go to Parkway first?
Sure.
My 10th time down here in Salem, they get better every time, and the jokes get better too from Carrie for some reason. I'm not sure what that is, but Carrie, since you're the funniest guy on the set, you have to leave now. So, Carrie Harvey Cutter, the Director of Tourism for Salem, Virginia, thank you for everything you do for us.
It's fun.
It is a lot of fun. Yep. We're going to exit you and bring in Lenny real quick because Lenny
really
is...
tough act to follow.
Yeah, no kidding. Tough act to follow,
Thanks,
Lenny
Gary.
Reich. Is that what you're saying? So Lenny Reich is basically the head of communications, the assistant athletic director of communications, et cetera, sports information director of Mount Union, and all-around good guy. And he appears on Hoopsville every so often, our producer's show.
I think this is my bucket list of D3 shows. I think I've got them all. Yeah. Do I have them all? Is there any more things we can get on?
We better hope so, because we got to come more Stagg Bowls. I think.
Right, there you go.
But again, for those just joining us, it's the D3Football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. Frank Rossi, Adam Turr, Brian Tips will rejoin us soon. Lenny Wright. Lenny, Mount Union back here again for how many years in a row now?
It's 11 years in a row, 19 overall.
That's incredible.
Well, it never gets old. I tell you, our people, we told our staff a lot during the week is that, you always have to think about it, that for a lot of people on this trip, this is the first time they're doing this, whether it's players, whether it's some other staff members that are new, and so it never gets old. We always want to treat it as what it is and have respect for the people and the places here and everything else, and so for us, it's just a great time, and we, obviously I don't need GPS to get here. I know where everything's at. It's, people are really nice. They say hi to us. They know who we are, but we really treat it as, we never take it for granted. We're really fortunate. Our team and our staff have worked really hard to get back here, and like I said, we never think, we're going back there again. No, we're always excited to come back.
There's a guy or actually two guys in this room that were at Mount Union last week in Alliance. Adam Turr was one of them. How'd they treat you out there, Adam?
Lenny took great care of us. Best press box in Division III football, undoubtedly.
So, the game you saw last week, we were talking about it earlier, some concerns early. And Lenny, I'll let you guys kind of talk about that game a little bit more and the season overall. But, Vince Karras had to maybe be a little concerned in the first quarter. What do you think was the special sauce that made that game turn around?
Well, I don't know what Adam would think. I think one of the things, Mike Furta's interception was a huge play. And I think also holding them to field goals on those first two drives as opposed to touchdowns. Yeah, it did look reminiscent of some other matchups where they were converting on some third downs, making some plays when they had to, moving the ball up the field. But then the defense tightened up. They ended up getting those two field goals. And then the offense, you knew at some point the offense was going to get going. You just knew almost any Mount Union playoff game or almost any Mount Union thing, the offense comes alive at some point. There's almost like a basketball type run that Mount Union's offense goes on. And they got, they raced down the field 5 plays. They got the lead. They were up. And then that interception really just kind of charged up the crowd. I think it charged up the sideline. And then a couple plays later, they scored, and then they were up. So really, the whole first quarter kind of turned around in just the span of a couple minutes.
And the one thing that I thought was great, we covered the football aspect earlier, but that was my first playoff game experience in Alliance. The student section, the crowd, the whole environment there once the offense makes a big play like that.
It is. It is. It is on the bucket list of something D3 fans should be at, is a game at Mount Union Stadium.
So, somebody off camera named Pat Coleman said it's always like that, playoff or non-playoff, essentially, and I will agree with that as well.
That was a special playoff. Will you say with Whitewater coming to town, it was a little bit more special than maybe some previous semifinals?
I think definitely from our fans' point of view, I think our fans were really excited about it because, the opportunity to have Whitewater back at the stadium for the first time since 2003, they were at our place. And so, I think our fans, I think the fans of both programs over the years have really got into kind of tracking what the other one's doing. Not really the programs per se, because you've heard, I think all of you guys have heard us say before, we don't really view it as a rivalry. A rivalry is a game that appears on your schedule, Ohio State, Michigan, or those kind of things. But the fact that these, I think the fans, because they've been together for so many years, the fans of the two programs, they're the ones kind of checking out the scores throughout the season on both sides. And so, I think they were definitely amped up for the chance to both be in the stadium at the same time, and not to toot the horn of our stadium operations people or those things, but as far as the game goes, we didn't have any incidents in the stands. Everybody from both teams was well behaved, doing a great job, and having a great atmosphere. It really was, like Adam said, it really was a great day to see great Division III football and see two, obviously the two premier programs the last 10 years.
And it was fun because, as you mentioned, it's not a rivalry, so we never get to see it on campus. We haven't since 02 and 03 before it became what it is today, obviously. So to have that environment on campus, I thought was something special that we don't really get a lot in Division III to that extent.
Yeah, you don't get those kind of programs that maybe casual football fans kind of would pay attention to, and to get them both on the same field. It was a great atmosphere, a great day, and turned out to be great. But I think our program really reset themselves very quickly. The coaches were back in the office only 30 or 40 minutes after the game, and we kind of altered our preparation in the idea that we created Sunday became a Monday, and we just basically pushed our normal schedule up a day so that Sunday became a Monday as far as our practice plan and our preparation, and Tuesday and Wednesday and so on, and kind of did those things. And I think when you have a team as experienced as this one is, you can kind of do some of those things and be able to prepare your team for tonight. So.
Speaking of experience, you and I were talking earlier. Larry Karras is the athletic director now of Mount Union, former head coach. And Vince Karras, obviously, his son, is extremely supportive of Vince and his efforts. But Larry stays involved in the football program, obviously. Why don't we kind of tell people what his involvement is on an official, unofficial basis, I guess?
Well, the first couple of years, he backed away from the program, obviously to let the program kind of establish its own identity without him being the head coach. So he would still come to practice. He would still be involved if somebody had a question or watching film or those kind of things. But he really took a hands-off approach kind of to football. He would, those of you that might have been at games, you saw him on the sidelines, or you'd see him up in the press box. He'd just kind of be bouncing around or those kind of things. This year, we had a unique circumstance in the idea that we had our quarterback coach, a guy named Steve McNeely, actually got the job at Guilford College right before the start of our spring ball.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, Guilford College. Matt Pulowski was here the other night.
Absolutely.
Steve is his position coach, and Steve was Kevin Burke's position coach at Mount Union. So he goes down to Guilford, and we were getting ready for spring football and kind of the logistics of trying to hire somebody and post an ad and all those kind of things. It was kind of like, well, we weren't sure we'd be able to get all that stuff done in time before spring football started. So obviously we have a guy that's pretty good with quarterbacks right here on campus. So who also knew, when we made the decision that Therese was going to be, somebody that we were going to work out at quarterback. Therese is from Alliance. The Karrases have known him, his whole life. So, it was a great opportunity to bring, Larry back into the fold and have him work with quarterbacks and those kind of things. So throughout this year, he's been up in the press box, in the coach's box, kind of sitting there observing and answering questions or whatever else, and radioing stuff down to work with the quarterbacks and those kind of things. So obviously a great resource to have when you can have college football's winningest coach hanging out and helping out with the program.
No kidding. And I just want to ask him one more question about the wind. We had asked Fritz about it as well. How do you think it affects this team? Do you think it affects it much in the throwing or kicking game, or do you think it's whatever at this point?
Well, yeah, I think, one team's from Minnesota, one team's from Northeast Ohio, so I think weather is something we all deal with all the time. So I don't really know necessarily if it's going to play a big factor in the game. It might be interesting if a team, wins the toss. Do they, take the wind, or how do they manage some of those kind of things? How does it affect, kicking or decisions when you're going down the field? But no, I think really, I think these teams have played through all kinds of adverse conditions over time, and so I don't really know if it's the same for both teams, so I don't really know if it's going to have some huge effect on things.
I'll give Adam the last word on this one.
Oh, I'll just say that coming from Ohio myself, making this trip every year, always excited to be driving on 64 and 77 and see the purple Raiders flags waving from the car. Not something you see any other time of year going in this direction usually, but third week of December.
You look out back there at that parking lot right now. Our fans are so passionate. They're out there in the parking lot having a great time. They do phenomenal job, and we're so happy that they all jumped on the bandwagon to come down here. And for our fans and the people here in Roanoke and Salem are so great. The people are really what makes this the championship experience that it is, and they've treated all of our fans and other folks fantastic every time we've come.
I know you got some folks that might be back home watching right now. Final word to you. Anybody want to say hello to back home?
Caroline, make sure you get in bed in time. No, I'm just kidding.
You do that, Caroline.
But no, I think we've got a lot of fans watching as well back home. I know there's 14 or 15 different watch parties around the country. So we've had just great support, whether it's been on social media or other things. And, Keith may have to do double duty tonight because we'll have an NFL player on the sidelines. So Pierre will be down on the sidelines with the team. So we're excited that he wants to come here and support the team. So we're looking forward to having the game and getting going.
Is that a potential interview for later on?
Well, maybe. I have a hard time telling our players what to do, let alone an NFL player. So.
Nonetheless, Lenny Reich, the head of communications in the athletics department, the assistant or associate.
Assistant, yeah.
Excuse me.
My contract's coming up. You want to do some negotiations?
Absolutely. Well, we got two lawyers right here, so we'll
go.
team up.
Larry's got that quarterback coaching money to supplement.
That's right. There you go.
Oh, good call. Nonetheless, Lenny, thanks for joining us. Good luck tonight.
Thanks, guys. Great. Thanks very much.
Lenny.
Folks, we'll be back with kind of our parting thoughts on the 2015 season coming up here on the D3Football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show.
For the love of the game. That's what it's all about, they say. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that. A lot more.
Sure, the game is important, but as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team and the schools and communities we represent.
And for the many of us blessed with the strength to compete in sport at the college level, we understand that with what we were given comes a special obligation.
An obligation not merely to work towards a personal best in the classroom or in the sport we love, but rather an obligation to help those who have their own special needs and whose love for the game is no less intense.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. For Special Olympics athletes, victory belongs not only to those who first cross the line, but to all of those who compete and endure.
They are challenged in ways we cannot imagine. They are survivors who test themselves harder and with greater joy than we will ever know.
Since August of 2011, we and others from Division III campus communities have volunteered more than 250,000 hours, time away from the classroom and practice field, reaching across the country to coach and mentor Special Olympics athletes.
And to learn, as we all do, that in giving we receive so much more in return.
Sport ennobles us, and in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
Be part of it.
Get involved.
You can make a difference.
Something I discovered in myself is that if I have a goal, then I can accomplish it.
It's a well-rounded experience.
At a Division III school, you primarily a student athlete, so the school is really shaped around you developing yourself as a complete individual.
It helps a lot that you have a family with your team that can guide you.
Welcome back to the D3Football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. Again, I'm Frank Rossi. Ryan Tipsrey joining Adam Tur and I here to talk about 2015 as a whole. And every year we do this, we kind of do a parting shot, a parting thought of a microcosm or great example of the season we saw. I kind of gave Ryan tips or let him give his away early on, but he did come up with something a little more specific for us about a moment in time this season. And Ryan, let's talk about 2015 and kind of that microcosm moment that really jumps to mind for you that epitomizes the season.
Yeah, I mean, earlier I talked a little bit about the surprises throughout the season, but one thing that actually kind of jumps out at me is, and if you've ever listened to an Around the Nation podcast, you've already heard this team mentioned almost every single week by Pat Coleman. It's Finlandia. This is, the only new team of the year. But beauty of it is they won 3 games this year. Now 2 of them were against the same team, but you look at teams like Barry and Southwestern that started 3 years ago now, and both of them went winless their first year. Misericordia went winless its first year. And for Finlandia, which is in new territory, being in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan anyway, it's great to see a team come out with a couple wins. Hopefully it can kind of get some momentum built for the program and get them headed in the right direction. So it's great to see a new team kind of come out and do some good and get some momentum.
That's a great one, actually. I remember early in the season, Finlandia, it seemed like they overscheduled in some ways, it felt like, and they really had tough times in games. But to see them pull the wins out in the end sort of justifies it to some people.
And by overschedule, you got to point out it was Wisconsin Whitewater and Wisconsin Oshkosh and just some real big blowouts. I mean, it was those were tough games to do. But yeah,
we used to say about St. John Fisher in the old days that they used to overschedule and get better from the overscheduling. That's how they became a playoff team. So maybe they've got something going on there where they did learn from who they played, and that really is a thing in Division III football. You'll learn from scheduling teams like that, and that's why we always like to see that overscheduling scenario.
And you got to point out that, back in, was it 2002 and 3 when Whitewater was scheduling Mount Union for that exact purpose.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a strategy for most teams, yeah.
Well, and back to Finlandia, because we can't talk about them enough. Something about starting programs. Pat was at their first game of the year, and I actually was at their final game of the year, and you could just see the attrition when you look at the sideline and how few people are standing there, still healthy that late in the year. And it's just a growing pain, but talking to their coach after that last game and, after the first experience of a Division III football season, to go from someone like that who just got his feet wet and just learned what it takes to get through a 10-game season to now covering the playoffs, being here, seeing Mount Union and the machine and how they do it year after year, seeing St. Thomas, how they're kind of that middle program that had some lean years in the last decade but was able to right the ship and now become a perennial contender, even on a year like this where they weren't prognosticated to be a top 3 team and make it here. I think we've seen the wide variety of when you have as many teams as we have in Division III, that there's a story everywhere. Every team has a story, and I think we learned that this year.
What's your story?
Oh, I have several.
Pick one.
Well, the nice thing about this year was I was able to go to more Division III games this year than I think I had since I played a 10-game schedule.
Great tweeting from you all season long, by the way.
Thank you. Opened the year at Maryville. I happened to be in Tennessee that weekend to see Coach Sean Hayes make his coaching debut, which, again, we talk about new beginnings and a program starting over. Maryville had seen some success in the USA South. Mike Rader leaves to go coach his alma mater, East Tennessee State, when they restart their program. So now they bring in Sean Hayes, who played there, has coached there. He's been there almost his entire life. And he takes him to a huge win over Barry in the season opener. And then you think, okay, Maryville's the team to beat in the USA South. Barry looks way overmatched. And then Barry, a few weeks later, we look up at the standings, and they're, contending for the top of the SAA. So every week was a different story. I got to see Thomas More and the season that they had, which, I'm sure will be discussed later on by someone. But, Regis Scaife in his first year coaching the program, the death of a teammate right before the season starts, and how that whole team and community rallied around Mitch Kramer, that was something that'll stick with me forever, just being there on campus for so many of their games. Seeing Rod Huber win his 100th game at Mount St. Joe, that was a cool experience. I'd never seen a coach win his 100th career game before and get the Gatorade bucket afterwards, and that was the game against Finlandia. And then throughout the playoffs, and the one game this year that I know Ryan's excited about, that I'll never forget just because I've never seen a game like it at any level of football, let alone been on the sideline, let alone been on the sideline that you don't want to be on at that moment. Yeah. And that was the Wabash Thomas More game. That was in the second round at Wabash. That was the wildest finish to any game I had seen ever, and that was before Ethan Burrish scoops up the fumble in overtime and returns it 75 yards for a touchdown. And just to be on the Thomas More sideline, standing next to their athletic director when that happened, and just the everyone was so stunned, and it's just what football can do. I entered this season, having some second thoughts about football, as I'm sure some people have, who have been football fans for a long time, especially, having children who are of age to play. And, I don't know if I love football anymore, but you see moments like that and what they can do for people on both sides of it, and just the emotion, the whole spectrum of emotion that came out in that moment, that's unique to football, and I think that's what keeps us coming back year after year.
Little Giants what?
They always fight.
Yes, they do.
I heard that a few times while I was in Crawfordsville, once or twice.
I'm sure you did. And the reason Adam says that I would be particularly fond of that victory is I'm a Wabash grad for everybody who doesn't know out there, and I had said this throughout the season too. Is I've been watching Wabash football for 20 years, just obviously because of my affiliation there, and my dad was actually a Wabash grad too, and so it goes back even generations. And even from the start of the season, this was a Wabash team that looked better than in previous years, and for them to get to the regional final and everything and stuff, I don't want to say it didn't surprise me, but this was certainly one of the teams to do it.
Both our alma maters went 10-0 this year and made the playoffs.
Absolutely.
Go
That's
D3 football team.
Oh, boy, you had to go there with me coming up next, didn't you?
I can. Go Generals.
Well, that would be the focus of mine, unfortunately, in some ways. And this one I had to pre-write because there are some emotions attached to it. And if I didn't pre-write it, honestly, I don't think I'd be able to get through it without showing some of them. So let's see if I can stay as sterile as possible when I do this. When trying to determine mine, I received some news that reshaped my most poignant memory. The news that Union College's 24-year head coach, John Audino, supposedly retired from his position. For the past 9 seasons, you've grown to know me as a Stagg Bowl sideline guy, going out there in a little while, for D3Football.com and one of the Glardy Trophy show hosts. However, for 20 years, I was also known as the voice of Union College football in upstate New York. Let me be clear, first of all, John Audino did not retire from coaching. And based on what he stated before Union's final game of the season, he intended on returning to the Union sidelines for his 25th season as head coach and 28th season overall with Union. The only thing one can deduce from the chain of events is that Union football's all-time winningest coach was forced out the door in some unacceptable form. If this were Division I, it might be understandable. The team went 0-10 this past season and won just 5 games in the last 3 seasons. And yet, despite that downturn, Audino won 63% of his games as Union's head coach and led his team to the NCAA playoffs 5 times. I spoke with a former college president of Division III school recently that admitted in Division III coaching decisions for him, it was the entire body of work that needs to be examined, especially related to player successes off the field and reputation of the program that the coach helps create. Therefore, what is more important in this story is that Audino coached a staggering 145 Liberty League all-academic student-athletes and 4 Glardy Trophy finalists, one of the highest totals for any single coach in this entire country, let alone the East region. These student-athletes' successes were the most important thing to Audino, as shown by his own statement yesterday that started off by thanking the, quote, hundreds of dedicated young men he had the privilege to forge mutually beneficial relationships with on and off the field. Not only is Audino as classy as they come in the coaching ranks, but he understands the true meaning and importance of Division III principles of celebrating the student-athlete's successes on and off the field. Now, guys, you may say, Frank, it's football, and it's about wins and losses, and Audino coached too many losses in the past few years, but playing devil's advocate, that argument even makes no sense to Union because their Division I women's ice hockey team just hit 35 consecutive games without a win despite their coach receiving a multi-year contract extension. That's an NCAA record for futility, and she has more job security than Audino ever had. And the men's ice hockey program has returned to mediocrity after a national championship. Furthermore, why would that be the case in terms of why they treat Division III football this way? If the school knows what it did in removing resources from football over the last 10 years had an effect. And I reached out to Coach Audino to try to verify the following, but he declined comment. Yeah, I can tell you as someone that's been close to the program and from other sources that Union gutted its financial admissions resources from football and received during the heyday of Union football. For example, Union now has, as a percentage of roster loss, less admission slots than most NESCAC schools. So, folks, long story short, it comes down to this. We do a lot of hard work here in Salem on behalf of Division III each year. And we work the Stagg Bowl, we work the Glardy Trophy like we've been for me the last 9 seasons. And Division III football is a truly important thing in the lives of student athletes that play the game. They truly love the game. The Glardy Trophy distances itself from the Heisman because it's based on off-field performance as well. And this Stagg Bowl is attributed to student athletes who were lucky enough to string together tremendous seasons despite their classroom challenges and other hurdles that come alongside Division III athletics. What upsets me is that my school, the school that I've tried to represent for over 20 years and that Audino represented for the last 24 years with dignity and honor, lacked the wherewithal to understand that announcing a coach's ouster the day after Glardy and the day before the national championship is somewhat selfish and disrespectful and runs counter to what we're doing in volunteering our time and energy to the core principles of Division III every year here. And it makes me wonder if the administrators of Union truly understand what these core principles are. John Audino exemplifies those principles. And tonight, as you watch the Stagg Bowl, celebrate not just the touchdowns and tackles, but celebrate the fact that each player making a difference is playing a game they love for just the love of the game, while persevering in the classroom and showing leadership in their community. That's what this week is all about and why we celebrate it And I received a stark reminder of that yesterday when I read the news of Audino's ouster. But as classy as he is, he would tell us not to worry about him tonight, but to watch the game and the players, since in the end, it is always about the players. And I hope that Union and any schools like it get that message sooner rather than later before any more indefensible errors are made. Folks, we're going to go to break. We'll be back here. Welcome back to the D3Football.com Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. Guys, we're racing toward the All-America team announcements, but before that, let's talk about our predictions as we do every season on Stagg Bowl 43. Mount Union or St. Thomas, and by what score? You can see this on D3Football.com. If you haven't already, though, we're going to tell you what our picks were and why briefly here. Ryan Tips.
I've got it at a 4-point game, and I want to preface that, it's a close enough margin that I really do feel it's kind of any swing. I don't want to, it's kind of hedging it.
It's
but
within
really,
the margin of error.
It is. And, but I went with Mount Union 31-27. I think a little higher than offensively than a lot of people have gone. But both teams, they've got great defenses too, but they've also got great offenses. And I see them getting a couple touchdowns.
What do you think here, Mr. Turr?
I think these are the two best teams in the country, as we talked about all night. These are the two most evenly matched teams, and stylistically, too, not just from how good they are and how good they are at what they do and what they specialize in, but just stylistically. I mean, it's like looking in a mirror. Who has a weakness, and no one else has found a weakness in either of these teams yet, and which one of these teams can exploit the other's weakness first and then hang on. Basically, it's going to be a matter of surviving once you get a lead. I think Mount Union, they've started slow a little bit, and St. Thomas has been more the first half team. St. Thomas hasn't trailed in the second half all season. They like to jump out early and then just choke you out in the second half. Whereas Mount Union, as Lenny mentioned, their offense takes some time to get warmed up sometimes, but once it gets humming, it's pretty much unstoppable. So I could see some scoring changes in this game. I don't think it's going to be, whoever scores first wins, even though these defenses are great. It's a tough one. It could not be any closer. Mount Union 24, St. Thomas 23. There will be a 2-point conversion. I don't know if it'll be successful or not.
Okay. My In the Huddle co-host James Baker called me out on Twitter earlier today as being the contrarian of the group, and apparently I am. I said that St. Thomas has a slight edge in two ways in this game. Number one, I think Mount Union will have a little bit of that mental hangover effect from beating Whitewater, kind of their Stagg Bowl opponent for the last 2 years last week, and they'll come out a little soft from that. And I think that the war in the trenches gets slightly won here by St. Thomas, which is how Whitewater beat Mount Union the last couple of seasons at this very game. So as such, you said it correctly. It's going to be a close game either way. St. Thomas wins 30-26, according to my guesstimate here. Folks, we're going to be going to the All-America show coming up very soon. A reminder that the next portion of what we're doing after All-America, the interviews, the pregame show for the audio broadcast, etc., is going to be on D3Football.com's second stream. You'll see it if you go to D3Football.com. Lower on the page, I believe, is where it's located. Nonetheless, you'll see it there at D3Football.com. Again, we're proud to be here again for the umpteenth season on D3Football.com. Ryan Tips, Adam Turr, thanks for joining me in this pregame show. And thanks, as always, to our producer, Dave McHugh, for the great job he does in DMAC Productions. We will go now to the All-America show, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show. It's time to go through the D3Football.com All-America teams. There's 4 teams, a lot of names to get through right now. And executive editor of D3Football.com, Pat Coleman, is joining me right now. Pat, why don't we go through first how these players were arrived at on these lists?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Frank, and it starts with the all-region nomination process. There's 248 football playing schools in Division III, of which I think about 246 are eligible for postseason honors because they're full members of D3. Any school could have nominated their players, generally first and second team all-conference recipients. So we had over 1,000 nominations for all-region, and then we ended up naming just about 300 of them to all-region teams about a week ago Monday. That group then we take and whittle down into our 4 teams of All-Americans, and we are very stringent. We have just 104 names on our All-American teams, unlike some where it really is more like an All-of-America team, where the list is 600 names. We're a very exclusive list, and we keep it that way. We always want to make sure, you know, the coaches have to decide who are the 11 players they're putting on the field. We're deciding who are the 11 players who are on our All-American team on offense, the 11 on defense, and a couple of specialists.
I'm a voter of the All-East team, and for the last few years, and I can't remember nearly as many names to vote on as we had this year. And so to the sports information directors out there, congratulations on that, and keep it up, because obviously we want a good selection of players to choose from. And so this is a very meritable list. And I think we should probably start going through it. We'll start with honorable mention, then go third team, second team, and then to obviously the first team. By the way, our backdrop is the Hotel Roanoke. I want to thank them for allowing us to shoot this in their hotel. Beautiful Christmas settings here in the Hotel Roanoke. So if you ever get down to the Salem, Roanoke area, please come by and see it. As you can see behind us, it is beautiful. Honorable mention time, he said. And here we go with that honorable mention team. Quarterback, Therese Scott, senior from Mount Union. Running backs are Sam Benger, sophomore from Carnegie Mellon, and Dan Andrews, junior from Brockport. Wide receivers, James Okiki, a junior from Wesley, and Joey Sonnenfeld, a senior from Augsburg. Jonathan Schmidt, senior from Kane. Tackles, Matthew Gano, sophomore from Wesley, and Will Hilbert, junior from St. Thomas. Guards, Johnny Casano, junior from Albright, and Michael Franks, senior from Mount Union. Center, Andrew Garibaldi, senior from Carnegie Mellon. From that offensive team, Pat, briefly, looks like a pretty good selection of teams across regions. What jumps out at you?
Well, one of the things is this is actually the cut line right here, right? Honorable mention is the bottom of the fourth of our 4 teams. So we had a lot of discussions as to who was going to be the quarterback in that spot. I actually talked to a couple of coaches who had seen 2 or 3 of our candidates on film or played against them, and Therese Scott just kind of floated to the top. He's obviously done a great job, even though this is his first year as a starter for Mount Union. And then, the potent Wesley offense, we'll probably call some other names, but James Okiki is a fantastic wide receiver and just a junior for the Wolverines.
Let's go to defense. Ryan Elker, senior from Bluffton, will start it as defensive end. Also, Brian Corey, junior from Carnegie Mellon, the other defensive end. Defensive tackles, Peyton Theory, junior from St. John's, and Heath McCrae, senior from Huntingdon. Linebackers, Alex Mangan, senior from St. Scholastica. Carter Hansen, junior from St. John's, and Jesse Addo, junior from St. Thomas. Cornerbacks, Quincy Marting, senior from Washington University, and Victor Bunce, sophomore from Claremont Mudd Scripps. Safeties, Drew Fitzmaurice, sophomore from Carnegie Mellon, and Anthony White, senior from Huntingdon. We'll go through the specialists as well here. Kicker, Jacob O'Neill, senior from Mary Hardin Baylor. Punter, Tim Willett, senior from Louisiana College. And returner, Josh Bungum, senior from St. John's. One thing that jumps out at me, I think 3-4 players from Carnegie Mellon on the entirety of the honorable mention list. It's kind of the Carnegie Mellon list.
Well, and they really came on strong at the end of the year, right? If you remember, that's a team that was kind of forgotten about. They picked up a couple of losses early. Then they came and they blew the doors off of the University of Chicago, effectively knocking them out of the playoff race. They also beat Case Western Reserve down the stretch. I think they ended up going 8-3, including an ECAC bowl game win.
That's right.
So a really good year for Carnegie Mellon, and not all of those guys were seniors right on that list. In fact, just one of the 4. So something to look out for there. I wanted to point out Victor Bunce, the cornerback for Claremont Mudscripts, 9 interceptions on the season as a sophomore. Expect not to have the ball thrown your way next year, sir. And Ryan Elkers had just a great career at defensive end for Bluffton, double-digit sack guy, and a fantastic season for him too.
Let's keep on going to the third team at this point. Again, this is the D3Football.com All-America show for 2015, or All-America teams for 2015. Quarterback is Matt Pulaski, senior from Guilford, a Ghilardi Trophy finalist. Running backs, Jordan Ratliff, senior from UW-Whitewater, and Sam Sira, another finalist, senior from St. John's. Wide receivers, Roman Namdar, senior from Mount Union, and Adam Smith, senior from Guilford. Tight end, Nick Kirkus, sophomore from Whitworth. Tackles, Michael LaSala, junior from Washington and Lee, and Tony Kopnick, junior from UW-Whitewater. Guards, Peter Gibson, junior from Wheaton, Illinois, and Matthew Schmidt, senior from Wesley. Center, Spencer Shire, junior from UW-Whitewater. 3 players from Whitewater, 2 players from Guilford on this list.
Yeah, true. And it's interesting, when the weekend started last weekend before the semifinals, we had talked about Ratliff and Sura, and they were kind of split. One of them was probably going to make the second team. One of them was going to make the third team. We'll find out after the break why that didn't happen, but they both end up on the third team. Pulaski, what a fantastic season and career he had. Kepnick, one of the anchors on the Whitewater offensive line, and Adam Smith, Guilford's top receiver over the past few years, and then of course Roman Namdar, whose name I assume we'll hear a few more times during the course of this evening.
Very impressed by how respectful Pulaski was on Wednesday night at the Ghilardi Trophy award show, where he basically said the team accepted the committee's decision not to include Guilford into the tournament. It was a nice moment, and very proud of him for doing that, and he had a great season, as you said. Defensive ends, Andrew Robinson, senior from UW-Platteville, and Nick Woodman, senior from Utica. Defensive tackles, Tariq Bennett, senior from Brockport, and Ryan Winter, junior from St. Thomas. Linebackers, Andrew Belkin, senior from UW-Platteville, Darren Dungy, senior from Rowan, and Max Naswitz, senior from Springfield. Cornerbacks, Austin Davis, junior from Kane, and Tyrell Bolden, senior from Illinois Wesleyan. Safeties, Kinu Yamamoto, senior from Linfield, and Jimmy Fairfield-San, senior from Amherst. Specialists, kicker Alex Hallwachs, senior from Washington University, punter Tyler Hunt, senior from Guilford, and returner Derek Bell, sophomore from Guilford. A lot more Guilford on this list at the end of it as well, and some Platteville players as well. A team that didn't necessarily have the greatest season compared to last year, did very well though, and they're being represented well by their lists right here.
Well, I mean, Platteville went 8-2. They were pretty much exactly the same as they were last year, except Whitewater was better. Ryan Winter, a name we'll probably call as a guy who's an interior guy, a nose guard in a 3-4 defense. The stats don't necessarily always add up for those guys, but definitely one of the top defensive players in the nation. Keanu Yamamoto, just a fantastic year for Linfield. And even though St. Thomas ran a bunch on Linfield last week, they didn't pass a whole lot on them, and partially because of Yamamoto and the rest of the secondary there. I also wanted to point out Tyrell Bolden, the cornerback from Illinois Wesleyan. He's a guy who had, I think, only 2 interceptions on the course of the year. But one of the things that we do is we actually email all of the Division III football coaches, and we ask them, who are the guys that you, as an offensive coordinator, as a head coach, instruct your team to throw away from? They're that good, and their stats might not reflect it. Bolden is definitely one of those guys.
Well, that's 2 of the 4 teams in this All-America team list. We'll come back from break and give you the second team and first teams coming up here on the pregame show.
I used to never really talk. Ever. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. It helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
Division III schools offer academic scholarships instead of athletic scholarships. This really puts the focus that the student athlete needs to maintain that GPA.
I did receive a non-athletic scholarship upon entering school.
I got the presidential scholarship, which was huge for me.
I think there's more opportunities for academic scholarships in Division III. A lot of people pick schools just based on the sport and don't get that experience.
Being a Division III athlete and developing my leadership skills has definitely put my name out there and helped me get more recognition on campus, but more recognition nationwide. I did win the Jostens Trophy, which is based on leadership, academics, and then how well you do on the court.
I'm also the Schwartz Scholar of my class. Schwartz Scholarship is basically a scholarship that is given to a student who's identified as a likely leader.
And the end of the day, it won't matter how they play on the field, it will matter how they do in the classroom.
I'm a Division III student athlete, and I know how powerful words can be. The term gay doesn't mean stupid, lame, or less than.
So I pledge to speak up if I hear the term gay used in a derogatory way or any other homophobic terms.
If you can play in Division III.
I'm a Division III student athlete, and my teammates unconditionally accepted me as part of their family. So now I pledge to do the same for others. If you can play in Division III.
Welcome back to the Stagg Bowl 43 pregame show, and we'll continue now with the 2015 D3Football.com All-America teams. We've already done honorable mention and third team, so it's time for the second team. We'll start with the offense. As quarterback, Sam Riddle, junior from Linfield. Running backs, Travis Sparks Jackson, senior from Laverne, and Logan Nemeth, senior from Mount Union. Wide receivers, Matt Boyce, senior from Gustavus Adolphus, and Devin Price, senior from Ohio Northern. Tight end, Zach Hogia, senior from Heidelberg. The tackles are Anthony Latina, senior from John Carroll, and Matt Sneebold, senior from Wheaton, Illinois. Guards, Broderick Jenkins, junior from Mary Hardin Baylor, and Tyler Good, senior from Lebanon Valley. Center, Mitch Doherty, junior from Mount Union. Sam Riddle, there's a name, Linfield still had some great quarterbacking power in the playoffs, but his presence was missed when he had his ankle injury early on in the playoffs, and just a tremendous athlete, and glad to see him on the second team.
Yeah, and definitely well-deserved. He was, I think, coming into the season, one of the top three quarterbacks. We only named 2 preseason All-American quarterbacks, but he was definitely pretty much the next guy on the list, I would think, at that time. Travis Sparks Jackson, the running back from Laverne, is a guy who's on this list who, if you were looking at the All-SCIAC team, you might wonder why. There's a running back for Occidental who was actually the Offensive Player of the Year in that conference, but this is one of those instances where we just frankly did not agree. Sparks Jackson looked really good throughout the course of the regular season, and then had a fantastic playoff game against St. Thomas in the first round, and that's why he got onto this list.
Let's go to defense. Defensive ends, Tedrick Smith, junior from Mary Hardin Baylor, and Brandon Jones, senior from Widener. Defensive tackles, Corey Zavala, senior from Hardin Simmons, and Tyler McCullen, senior from Wabash. Linebackers, Pierce Thedford, senior from Mary Hardin Baylor. Justin Dischler, senior from UW Whitewater. And Hank Spencer, senior from Mount Union. Cornerbacks, Trey Jones, senior from Mount Union, and Kyle Belcher, senior from Linfield. Safeties, Bill Shimko, senior from Montclair State, and Jack Toner, junior from Johns Hopkins. We'll get to specialists in a moment. Wanted to focus in on defense here on the second team, and you're starting to see a couple names from Mount Union pop in again, and obviously they're playing in a little bit for a national championship, but a pretty good spread again across all regions.
Yeah, Trey Jones is a real shutdown corner for the Purple Raiders. He's had a fantastic season. The guy who's really come along over the course of his career. A couple years ago, much maligned as a sophomore, had a fantastic senior season. Tedrick Smith, defensive end for Mary Hardin Baylor, just a junior. He's a guy who, though, if you've been following Division III for the past few years, he burst onto the scene as a freshman back when Wesley came down to open their stadium, the new stadium at Mary Hardin Baylor back in 2013. And the fantastic Wabash defense gets represented here too, with Tyler McCullen up front, and Justin Dischler, another in a long line of Whitewater linebackers.
Who knew?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah. Specialists, Thomas Woodburn, senior from Utica. Punter, Tyler Henning, senior from Coast Guard. And returner, Kennedy Johnson, junior from Linfield. Now, a lot of people might stop and say, Coast Guard. Coast Guard's got a second teamer, but that punter, Tyler Henning, was something else this season.
Yeah, he was. And another guy I want to spotlight on this group is Woodburn, Thomas Woodburn, the kicker from Utica. If you look at the number of field goals he kicked this year, I think it literally is 22 for 25. A fantastic, ridiculous and fantastic season. And Kennedy Johnson, one of the things we really value is kicks returned for a touchdown, also punts returned for a touchdown. And he was, I believe, president in both categories for the Wildcats.
Well, that leaves just one list here, the first team All-Americas. And Pat, I think some names that people have heard a lot throughout the season. They won't be surprised by this, but hey, let's continue and go through that first team All-America team list. And the quarterback is the Glory Trophy winner, Joe Callahan, senior from Wesley. Running backs, Mason Zurich, senior from Wabash, and Jordan Roberts, junior from St. Thomas. Wide receivers, Bryce Shade, junior from Wesley, and Jesse Ramos, senior from Hardin-Simmons. Tight end, Charlie Dottle, senior from St. Thomas. Tackles, Sam Versnick, senior from UW Oshkosh, and David Simmet, senior from St. Thomas. Guards, Colin Egan, senior from Johns Hopkins, and Chase Wilhelms, senior from Wartburg. Center, Eric Patasi, senior from Linfield. What jumps out at you here? Besides all of them.
Yeah, exactly, because it's the first team All-Americans, right? Chase Wilhelms, first of all, at guard for Wartburg, kind of the last remnants of that fantastic offensive line that the Knights had last year. They lost 2 All-Americans from that line, but Wilhelms, still around, was able to keep them as competitive as the Knights were this year. We've talked about Callahan quite a bit. We'll talk about Roberts, and we'll talk about Simmet some more, and I assume we'll talk about Dowdle, although that depends on how much the passing game is involved. Mason Zurich was a fantastic running back for Wabash this season, over 2,000 yards, and really came on strong during the playoffs. That was fantastic for them. And one of the things that I thought when this, kind of the voting and the rest of it came down for this list is a lot of schools have multiple names, but I just frankly think it's deserved. These teams are good for a reason because they have a lot of good individual players.
It's interesting, 3 first-team offensive players from St. Thomas, 0 from Mount Union. It shows interesting, but in the second team...
Well, just wait till you go on.
Yep, and this is, I think, how the game kind of lines up for tonight, and that is the defense time here on first-team All-America. Defensive ends, Alex Hoff, senior from Linfield, and Mike Furta, senior from Mount Union. Defensive tackles, Tom Lally, senior from Mount Union, and Kyron Brown Wallace, junior from St. Lawrence. Said that name a few times, I should get it right. Linebackers, Adam Dansdill, senior from Wheaton, Illinois. Keith Corliss, senior from Johns Hopkins. And Rashad Lightly, senior from Delaware Valley. Cornerbacks, Vincent Beltrano, senior from Chicago. And Leandre Simon, senior from St. Lawrence. Safeties, Alex Kochev, senior from Mount Union. And Ryan Winsky, senior from UW Whitewater. So we're kind of balancing the score here with 3 defensive players from Mount Union.
Yeah, Frank, it's almost like you walked into the exact thing that I noticed when this was put together. It's like, indeed, one of the things we're always looking for is to make sure it makes sense with the teams that are still here. And yes, 3 St. Thomas offensive players, and I think well-deserved 3 Mount Union defensive players as well. Tom Lally, just fantastic up front. He's the Mount Union all-time career leader in sacks. But I also wanted to point out Rashad Lighty, who you mentioned. He's the linebacker for Delaware Valley. That's another spot where I think we might deviate from the MAC all-conference team. And Leandre Simon, you could probably talk more about him than I could.
Yeah, Leandre Simon is one of those players that, like you were talking about earlier, it's not just on interception totals, it's about who you don't throw against. And in his case, it's even beyond that because he's one of those rare finds as a two-way star. He plays wide receiver almost as many downs as he plays defensive back, or played at least for St. Lawrence that way. He's just a talent that you don't see anymore in college football of any level, and he was amazing. It's simply amazing. Kyron Brown Wallace also there as defensive tackle. You can see that the Saints have some great talent on the defensive side of the ball, and that's how they got back to the playoffs after 5 years of absence in the playoffs, 2010 to 2015. Specialists. Place kicker is Daniel Sobolewski, senior from Albright. Punter, Nico Francino, junior from Hardin-Simmons. And returner, Jesse Ramos, senior from Hardin-Simmons. So that special teams approach there from Hardin-Simmons is something special, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the reason is, one of the things I wanted to point out here is Francino's not the first team all-conference punter for the American Southwest Conference. They only have 5 conference games, and he missed 1.5 of them because of injuries. The guy who's the first team punter for there is Tim Willett, a senior from Louisiana College, who was on our honorable mention team, also a very fantastic punter, and a guy that's getting some pro looks. They're both really good. Jesse Ramos, I mean, shoot. As a wide receiver, basically won the regular season game against Mary Hardin Baylor with the late touchdown, and he's a guy who's been a fantastic returner basically his whole 4 years as a Cowboy.
Pat, just by the way these lists line up, first off, congratulations to all the players. This is a tremendous honor. About, give or take, 1%. You're in the top 1% if you're on any of these teams in Division III football by making these teams.
Oh, less than that.
Probably.
It's 1 in 250.
So that's amazing. And, the thing that really jumps out at me when you look at, Mount Union St. Thomas scenario here as we prepare for the game is Mount Union has plenty of players. St. Thomas has plenty of players. Some people feel that this may be a route-type game, that Mount Union's that kind of team that's just going to run through St. Thomas. These names and everything else we've been seeing don't suggest that. This should be a pretty good game coming up based on the talent on both sides of the ball.
I think so as well, and I would remind people to stick around all the way through the end of the game, because that's when we'll be announcing who the offensive player of the year is, who the defensive player of the year is, and who the coach of the year is. But know that, of course, the offensive player and the defensive player of the year come from that first team of offense and defense on the All-American team. So it'll be one of those people.
Should be a great discussion. We usually have a little bit of a discussion before they're named after the game. And Keith McMillan will be in on that discussion with Pat Coleman after the game. Between now and kickoff, however, you're going to want to switch streams because we will have some interviews with coaches and players that Pat has done throughout this week, and they'll be coming up next on a separate stream. So go to d3football.com, look for the second stream, and that's how you'll find it, and also the audio broadcast to the game that's coming up. Kickoff time around 7:05, give or take. We'll probably go on the air around 7. To start the pregame for that.
We're going to start at 6:30 with our. We're start momentarily.
Momentarily.
Yeah. Keith's keys to the game will be the last thing before starting lineups, and then kickoff at 7:05.
There you go. He's got the agenda. What do I know? Anyway.
17th Stagg Bowl.
17th Stagg Bowl out of 43. We'll let you do the math at home on that one. Nonetheless, folks, thanks for joining us and enjoy the game. It should be a good one here. It's Stagg Bowl 43 coming up here. D3football.com. Our pregame show continues on the second stream. Thanks for joining us again.